to take a trip together back in time. If you live long enough to approach your 100th birthday, as my mother did, the seasons are many. Mom was born into a world that's almost unimaginable for most people today. In 1920, 100 years ago, there was no internet, no email, no Skype, no Facebook, no FaceTime. There was no television. Television didn't come to the United States until she was 20 years old. And then, even then, few people had it until she was in her mid-30s. And the radio, the first commercial broadcast was in 1920, the year she was born. No radio. So for those living in rural America, as she did, the center of their lives was family life. Mother, father, sister, grandparents, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews. And it seemed there were lots of them in Mom's life growing up. Mom's parents were George and Talvy, and she had one sibling, Marilyn, who was 3 years younger. She grew up in central Illinois on the land her ancestors had carved out of the wilderness in the 1800s and made into some of the best farmland, if not the best farmland in the world. Over the generations, these ancestors migrated from Europe to the east coast of the United States, then moved west to Illinois, where there was land you could buy for a fair price. And with luck, you could make a future for yourself. Many of you will remember the Illinois house in which Mom grew up and where her parents lived until they died. Their home was out in the country on a one-lane road, paved by the time I saw it in the 1950s. George's brother lived down the lane, family. Generations of their ancestors were memorialized on the headstones in the cemetery nearby. Trees grew big down the hill from the house, big oaks and maples in some in the yard. Behind the house was a barn and feedlots. George, my grandfather, bought cattle and had a feedlot to feed and then take the cattle from yearlings to full grown and then to market. He bought land and he raised corn, beans, and wheat. Dad said he was the best judge of cattle he'd ever met, knowing just what to buy and which would get the best price when it came time to sell. It was a mile or two, Bob, you'll have to correct me if I got this wrong. It was a mile or two to the little schoolhouse where Mom rode her horse to school as a youngster. The nearest town was Pleasant Plains, a few miles away, a thriving metropolis of 800 today. It was 1,100 back in 1920, a little town. So you can imagine their life out in the country along that little country lane. By all accounts, Mom thrived in her youth. This is what Mom had to say about those years. We had a wonderful childhood. I'm sure that the children of today would think it was very dull, but we didn't know differently, and we were so loved, adored by our parents. Perhaps I have forgotten the unpleasant things, but I really can't think of many. We weren't very happy when Daddy or Mother would not pick us up at school on time, and I did not want to go to school when I was 6. And they had a terrible time getting me to go. It was a horrible experience for us all. We spent a lot of time playing with our dolls, playing house, riding our ponies, swinging on our swing, going to Grandpa and Grandma's in Geneva, who was his mother's sister. Winters, Mother would close the upstairs when we were little and move our housekeeping things out to the hallway where it was warm as the chimney went up there. Summers, we moved back into the East Room, which was just a room with straw matting on the floor. We had our little electric stove, a little cupboard, and a tiny wooden table curtained off for a kitchen. Mother made us a little dressing room for our bedroom, which had the dolls in it. The dining room had a card table in it, and always the doll buggy was there someplace. The next years brought college and marriage and the war years, a new season for her life. My mother and father met while Mom was teaching school and Dad was on Christmas break from Iowa State. He and another fraternity brother, Bob Butcher, this Bob Butcher's father, hitched a ride to Pleasant Plains with a third fraternity brother named Strib Boynton, who had a car and lived in Pleasant Plains. The plan was for Dad to stay with Trib for a few days over the Christmas holiday and for Bob to catch the train in Chicago and then go back to his home in New York. When they arrived in Pleasant Plains, Strib asked if either would like to go out. He said he thought he could find dates. Two sisters he'd grown up with. One was a teacher. And with that, Dad exclaimed, "I'll take the teacher." The two sisters were, of course, Eleanor and Marilyn. And with that, both he and Bob were introduced to their future spouses. Without going into the details, I can say that in those days, both Mom and Dad appeared to be, I would say, ridiculously in love with each other. We have letters going back and forth between the two, at least a couple of letters a week, sometimes one a day during that time, with many visits in between them until they were married on December 23rd, 1943, immediately after Dad was commissioned in the Navy. Then Dad was off to initial training in war in the Pacific. These times apart were difficult, to say the least, for both of them. Mom and her family had many, many friends from Pleasant Plains and from her college years, but was anxious, not knowing where Dad was and whether or not he was safe, and of course with good reason. This was all top secret because the censors monitored every sailor's mail. Mom's anxiety and worry was constant. Each longed for the company of the other, and neither was shy about expressing their feelings. Oh my goodness, you ought to read those letters. This was the diary this is from the diary Dad maintained during his deployment at sea. This was written in his diary, October 4th, 1944, in New Guinea. If you know where New Guinea is, it's a little bit, I think, north of Australia. So it's the far end of the earth. Here in the Admiralty Islands, we are 8,000 miles from Chicago, only 1,500 miles from the Philippines, much, much closer than that to enemy territory. It's difficult to realize that we are now in the heart of what 2 years ago was the Japanese Empire's front yard in the Pacific. Already we were several thousand miles inside the front gate and about ready to step onto the front porch. There is no doubt among us that the Philippines is our next stop. Tonight, as I write this, we are riding at anchor in Seidler Harbor. Movies are being shown on the number 3 hatch. I've seen this one, however, and after taking cholera shots and atropine tablets today, I'm ready to turn in. The moon tonight is full. Here we lie, a vessel of war in the heart of a war zone. Yet 300 men are sitting on deck, completely captivated by a moving picture whose drama is neither as stirring nor as real nor as dangerous as the very life they are sharing this minute. An interesting thing has come to my attention since I've been at sea. A person's mind can develop its power to dream, visualize, or picture or remember to the same extent as reality. I have certainly no dream that is to me more constantly than that of my wife. How often I relive experiences we have known and how vivid is the reliving of them. And two, just such reflection has reminded me of the many wonders of my darling Eleanor. So sweet, so lovely, and so very much the precious woman of my dreams. This love affair continued through the years, which each other's being their best friend and companion. Tragically, Strib, the friend who introduced my father to my mother and Bob Butcher to Marilyn, was killed in Europe by a sniper fire in 1945. This loss in the small community of Pleasant Plains was heart-wrenching. After the war years, Mom and Dad moved to Vermilion, had Stan and Kath and me, and built this house where Mom would live until a few years after Mom died in 2004. Mom had her hands full raising her 3 young children. I might say particularly dealing with her 2 sons who were known to be uncontrollable.
I can vouch for that.
Catherine, not so much. Punishment for the boys' misbehavior was normally the brush. That was a swat across the bottom with her hairbrush, usually with questionable results. I normally laughed it off, which infuriated me. Stan took it more seriously. Every summer, as soon as school was out, we moved to our cabin on Gull Lake, 150 miles north of Minnesota, where we would stay until school started in the fall. Often, Dad would spend the summer in Vermilion, looking after the farm and taking care of business, so Mom had most of the responsibility for us, which she did without missing a step. While we kids thought we were in heaven at the lake with unlimited playing on the beach, swimming, boating, fishing, sailing, running, and playing, Mom was less enthusiastic. She missed having her husband nearby. Still, occasionally, her sister Marilyn, Bob and their family, and her parents came for a visit. And she had great lifelong friends her age who lived next door, the Cheneys and Collins, also from Vermilion,